Hi, it's Father Anthony Hannon from NVM Patches. This is To Prepare His Way. This is just a follow-up on the last two videos that the Catholic Church scandals is a problem of codependency. I'd just like to explain that briefly a little bit better. Why do I say the problem is codependency? I mentioned alcoholism, and maybe I said, a few times. I did say a few times, all we want is Dad to stop drinking. I'm not trying to say anything about various bishops or the Pope or anything like that they have a drinking problem. I really don't know. They could, for all I know, but that's not the point. I'm saying the problem is codependency because I think that the big problem right now that the average Joe sees is the cover-up or the protection of abusive priests by bishops. We're also seeing abuses by bishops and cardinals taking advantage of seminarians or other priests. This is a big problem. I'm not sure if it's a worldwide problem or not. I just met a priest from Africa, and he was asked if there's a problem of homosexuality in the priesthood in his country, and he says very few, very few. Relatively speaking, of course, I think it's relatively few in North America and in Rome, but I'm hearing that it's a much higher percentage than I would have thought. Okay. The problem is codependency because of the misapplied responsibility. In codependency, someone feels somehow responsible for the addict, or they feel responsible for the actions of other persons. And then they take matters into their own hands and cover up, or they think that they failed the person in some way, so they feel a shame that maybe the addict ought to feel, and probably does feel, but this is the dynamic that goes on. So they don't talk about it, and they brush it under the rug, and recovery from codependency, to a large extent, just like recovery from an addiction, it's about taking personal responsibility. Now, an addict often is described, or will describe themselves as, in their acute stages, that is when they are using, when they are drinking, they will call themselves self-centered to the extreme. The codependent has kind of the opposite problem. The codependent feels responsible for things that are not their responsibility. In the church, at least in the United States and Canada, I don't know elsewhere in the world, when a priest has done terrible things to someone and then this comes to light, often financial compensation is paid, or the victims sue the church, or their lawyers sue the church, and they win huge settlements, or settlements are made kind of behind closed doors, and this is unjust. I'm not saying that victims should not receive some sort of compensation. All the more power to them, honestly. This is awful what priests or others, sometimes choir directors or various people who misuse their position in the church to gain trust and then abuse others in this, that, or the other way. This is absolutely terrible and disgusting, and it's also a sin against the second commandment, thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain, and it's just a terrible, terrible thing. I'm glad if they can get some compensation. The problem is that it's the people in the pews who are not responsible for these actions who end up paying. because they put the money in the collection for their parish. A certain percentage of that goes to the dioceses, and then a certain percentage of that goes to pay the victims. This is not just. What is just? That the perpetrator pays. That a bishop who covers up pays. Not that the people pay. And when I said in the other videos that the children just want dad to stop drinking, the people just want the bishops to deal with the real problem, which is them protecting and covering up and enabling priests and others to do terrible things to others. This is why I say this is classic codependency. And the codependent will give the addict, or in this case we might say the perpetrator, the benefit of the doubt over and over and over and over again. This has to stop. That's what has to stop. And that's why the Catholic Church scandal crisis is a problem of codependency. The Church, the bishops in particular, and then priests, have lost credibility in our society, at least in Canada and the United States. We've lost credibility in the eyes of those we want to evangelize, and we've lost credibility in the eyes of many baptized Catholics, some who continue to attend Mass every Sunday and more, which they ought to, and many Catholics who have long stopped going to Mass, and to whatever extent these scandals have contributed to the vast number of Catholics stopping practicing their faith. Right? They just want to see it stop. That's why I said in the other video, a bishop should call in all the priests who have unnatural desires and fire them, and pay the severances, pay the cost. In the long run it will be much cheaper. Yes, many persons, priests and laity, would be upset, but it would be the right thing to do, and it would restore credibility, because then zero tolerance means zero tolerance. Instead, the approach right now is to make new policies, new codes of conduct for priests. And I'm not saying those code of conducts are wrong or they shouldn't be done, but in some ways they are overreaching. And they are certainly painting all clergy with the same brush. And that's not fair either. That's not right either. And is impeding our ministry to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to the whole world. I hope that clarifies some things. Leave some messages in the comments if you want. This is what I think is the fundamental problem. The other things are just symptoms, and these terrible abuses, they are real problems. I'm not saying they're not real problems. But for those of you who are in some sort of recovery program, you know that if the 12 steps were applied in the church, if each bishop and each priest practiced the 12 steps with rigorous honesty and searching and fearless moral inventories of themselves and proper boundaries and letting others take responsibility for their actions, this would go a long way in restoring credibility, in healing, and also in preventing abuse in the future. Why do I say that? Because if you treat grown men like they are children, they're going to act like children. If you treat grown adults like they are immature and irresponsible, then they will become irresponsible. But if you allow them to suffer the consequences of their own actions, and that they have to pay the price themselves, then they're going to grow up. Aristotle, going way back to Aristotle, he said the best way to make a man is to treat him to treat him like a man. That's how you help a teenage boy mature and become a man. You give him responsibility. You don't put him on a tightrope, and you don't put him in a straitjacket. You don't put him in lock and chains. You allow him to grow and to mature, and to grow into a mature, responsible, virtuous man. And VM patches.